Hello YouTube. Tamriel is a vibrant world filled with strange and foreign cultures and peoples, from the big intelligent cats that we call the Khajiit to the silver-skinned Kithringi humans of Blackmarsh. But one of the cultures that we haven't talked about yet on the channel, but which have appeared in no less than 2 mainline DLCs, are the Skaal of Solstheim, an obscure tribe of Nords whose culture is wholly different to the Nords on the mainland. Their culture is often overlooked, yet is endlessly interesting. So let's explore the Skaal, their customs, their religion, society and traditions, after the intro. So, the Skaal. The Skaal are a strange tribe of Nords who live a very isolated existence, quite literally at the end of the world, because as far as we know, Skaal village, located in the northern snowy wastes of Solstheim, is the most northern settlement on all of Tamriel, a place covered permanently in snow, isolated from the rest of the world. A place where the troubles of the world don't even reach the people living there, and where the biggest news in decades could be a house being built or a new animal being seen in the wilds. The problems of the world don't even pass by them, and it's likely that for a majority of the Skaal's history, they did not even know about the rest of the world and didn't particularly care to learn about what was going on. All of Tamriel could have been conquered by the Thalmor in the Great War, and the Skaal might not have even noticed unless the Elvish armies would have bothered to land on Solstheim itself. Skaal village, for all terms and purposes, is a very static place, not much changes. One could leave for 50 years and come back and then recognize the same places and people, almost exactly as they were when you left. And their entire culture is built around this static existence. Houses stay within families and are maintained and repaired over centuries, as almost nothing new is built. The existing is repaired and maintained, and the same goes for tools, weapons and furniture. An old chair where a leg breaks is repaired rather than thrown away and stays within a family. Even professions are hereditary. The Skaal traditionally only have one smith who keeps their secret techniques, and then traditionally the smith's child will become their apprentice and will then become the next smith, and then their child will become the next smith, and the tribe shaman's kid becomes the next shaman, and so on. Generally forming an unbroken line of one family holding a position, and only if one does not have children, someone else tends to be taken on as an apprentice. This all makes it so that a culture, which is said to stem from the Meretic era, has remained more or less the same over the millennia, although there has been some changes we'll talk about later. And this unchanging existence is very much on purpose, as the Skaal believe that they are as they should be, as the Allmaker, the sole deity that they worship, intends them to be. You see, the Skaal believe in one singular deity, the Allmaker, a deity which they see as the source of all life and creation and whose spirit is carried on the winds. It's the Allmaker who created a careful balance in all things that lie in the world, the animals, the trees, the rocks and the wind, all created to exist in a harmony with one another. And the Skaal see themselves as the Allmaker's chosen people, a people destined to live within this harmony that the Allmaker created. They see the world as a gift by the Allmaker, who gifted them the 6 essences of the world that gives the world life and its harmony: water to drink and to water plants, earth to stand on and grow crops, trees to give wood to build shelter, beasts to fell and use hides for clothing and meat, the sun to warm the world, and finally the wind to carry the Allmaker's spirit, so that the Skaal and everything in the world can live within the Allmaker's presence, so that the Skaal and the land are one, joined by the Allmaker. The Skaal quite literally revere creation, worshipping the Allmaker but considering all life and all of creation sacred. Each animal, tree, rock and water droplet is part of a great balance that the Skaal must not upset. They call this concept the oneness with the world, as they strive for a oneness with the world and the Allmaker to live within his creation without upsetting the natural order. This is why they only take from nature that which they need, careful not to live in excess. They only hunt when they truly need clothing or meat, not for sport or honor like many of the other Nords do. They typically don't fell trees and only fell trees in the utmost of need, otherwise always taking wood from dead trees. Each in the tribe of the Skaal takes according to their needs and is given according to their needs and works hard. And if one lives like this, then they see themselves as living as the Allmaker intended, and within the Allmaker's favor, one with nature. And out of this they say that they gain power. They say it allows them to talk to the wind and listen to the earth. And I'll be honest, we don't exactly know what that means, as the Skaal's powers or unique magics are never truly defined, but they themselves define it more so as an innate strength of the Skaal when all is in balance. Because when the balance of the world is upset, they say that they lose this strength. And it's because of this strict adherence to maintaining balance and only taking that which they genuinely need, that relatively little changes in the village. Why no new houses get built if their population doesn't grow, and why a centuries-old rickety old chair gets repaired rather than thrown on the fire and a new one gets made. And why they do not hunt for sport, as they consider the animals and life sacred, and thus just killing them for the sport of it is considered upsetting the balance. Meanwhile, if you really need a pelt or really need meat, then you are allowed to kill an animal. Violence against others is also seen as something to be kept as a last resort. When others make their homes on Solstheim, like the Imperials in the 3rd era and the Dark Elves in the 4th era, the Skaal don't tend to fight with them, even if they upset nature's balance, rather believing that those who upset the balance of nature will soon be taken by nature and slowly die out, as they do not find their place within the Allmaker's intended harmony and careful balance of the world. Although there are some dialogues in Morrowind that suggest that they might fight the Imperials, because the Imperials are complaining about having trouble with the local Nords, but that might be because the Imperials initiated it. We don't really know. Anyway, now the religion, insofar as we talked about it, is already quite different to the Nordic religion on the mainland, but the difference runs even deeper, as the Skaal do not believe in the concept of Sovngarde, a world beyond death. Rather, they believe that all that dies and withers remains in the world, and the spirit of dead mortal beings and things all return to the Allmaker for a time, until the Allmaker sends them back to the world to be reformed and to return to the world in a new life. For the Skaal, death does not mean the end of life, as it's simply a bookmark, a dividing point between two parts of the spirit's endless journey as decided by the Allmaker, who shapes the spirit into something new and returns you to the world. Now, you may wonder, how do the Skaal keep this seemingly monotheistic religion, a religion where they worship a single deity, in a world where Daedric princes, who quite literally could be called gods, exist and interact with the world? Well, the Skaal do not acknowledge them as deities worthy of worship. While they do acknowledge the existence of the Daedra and even the gods of the Adric pantheons, they do not see them as worthy of veneration or as true gods even, because none are as powerful and wise as the Allmaker. In fact, they see Daedric princes specifically as interfering demons. Demons who, unlike the Allmaker, have no true skill for creation, and therefore they see their creations, such as Dromora, Daedric weapons and other Daedric creations, as defilement of the Allmaker's creation. We see this in the Blood Moon DLC of Morrowind, where the Skaal describe werewolves, who are created by Hircine, as a corruption of the Allmaker's creation. If the player is a werewolf, they are not really willing to work with them, as they defile the harmony of the Allmaker, and Hircine as a demon who upsets the Allmaker's creation, just like how they see Hermaeus Mora as a demon of knowledge who wishes to steal the secrets of the Skaal. Not just that, they also see necromancy as a defilement of the natural order, and thus necromancers are to be shunned, and practicing necromancy among the Skaal is seen as a heinous crime, as are the acts of the Dwemer, as they see the Dwemer also as highly upsetting the natural order, and thus Dwemer technology is also a big no-no. And I can't help but think that when the Dwemer disappeared, the Skaal, who at that point were already around on Solstheim by the way, must have seen their disappearance as a righteous punishment and rebalancing of the world. Now, interestingly enough, in Skaal religious tradition there is actually one other being. While the Daedra and Aedra are seen as demons and lesser spirits of some kind, it seems, they do recognize a being or concept called the adversary, who is said to be the opposite of the Allmaker. This concept or being is trying to upset nature's balance and appears as unholy beasts, incurable plagues and all that upset nature. The adversary is a vaguely defined being that appears in the legends of the Skaal as a being or concept always meant to overcome. In stories, the adversary is said to be appeared as a greedy man at some point who took the gifts of the Allmaker and who had to be stopped by one of the Skaal's greatest heroes, Eivor Stonesinger, who took the Allmaker's gift back from the adversary. And he's also been known as a corrupt man and as a driving force behind the Snow Elves who tried to conquer Solstheim at some point. And in their mythology, the adversary will one day appear in the shape of Tartag, the World Devourer, a being who, much like Alduin in the traditional Nordic religion, will one day devour the world at the end of seasons, the Skaal concept of the end of the world. Now, I'll have to be honest with you here, both the Allmaker and the Adversary are actually vague beings that we don't know all that much about. We know some of how the Skaal interpret them, but we don't know how they fit in the Elder Scrolls' overall mythology. Some have suggested that they may be aspects of Anu and Panome, the primordial spirits of order and chaos, who appear in many of the religions and creation myths across Tamriel, with the Allmaker then of course being the aspect of order, who created nature's balance, and the Adversary being the aspect of chaos, who wants to lead the creation astray. However, when I was talking about this video with my fellow YouTuber and friend Teak, who is known for having very esoteric theories on the mythology of Tamriel, he proposed a different version that I can definitely see being true as well, knowing what we know. He proposes that the Allmaker may not be a god or equivalent to Anu and Panome, but he thinks that the Allmaker is the great process of the world, the active wellspring from which everything flows and takes part in. With him comparing the Allmaker and the Adversary a little bit to the Force in Star Wars, with a light side that one could live in accordance with, or a dark side that one could be corrupted by. He got to this theory by comparing some of the dialogues that we have about the Allmaker from the Skaal shamans that we meet with some of the teachings of real-life Taoism, with which there are quite a few similarities. Now, I won't claim to be an expert on any of this, but I found this theory to be super intriguing and I couldn't help but mention it, as it really does fit with many of the Skaal beliefs, but do take it with a grain of salt as it's very much a theory. By the way, I put Teak's channel in the description in case you want to check him out. He recently published a video on the Seisi, one of the Akaviri races, which I can very much recommend, so I'll put it in the description. Thank you for your theory, Mr. Teak. Anyway, while we have talked about the religion quite a bit now, we have not really talked about the Skaal people themselves, their lives, their customs, their history, so let's talk about that now. The Skaal are very much known as a friendly and hospitable people to visitors, at least to those who do not upset the balance of nature. In fact, before the Third Era, when the Empire started colonizing southern Solstheim for its ebony, there were basically no other settlements on Solstheim, and the Skaal were basically alone after the disappearance of the Dwemer, with, as far as we know, no other permanent settlements being on Solstheim other than settlements originating from the Skaal, until the founding of Fort Frostmoth and the settlement of Raven Rock in the Third Era, meaning that before this point, the Skaal were even more isolated. Now, it's said that the Skaal find their origin as a part of the Atmoran colonization waves of the Middle Meretic era, when settlers from Atmora, at this time dragon cultists, came to Tamriel with the dragons, when Ysgramor came to Skyrim with an army which would be known as the 500 Companions. According to an out-of-game source, one of the boats that came with Ysgramor was called Skaal, and many have theorized that it was this boat which ran aground on Solstheim, and it would have been those on board who became the very first ancestors of the Skaal as they settled on Solstheim. We don't know how true this story is, but it was worth a mention at least. Now, what we do know is that in early Nordic history, when man was ruled over by the dragons and started to rebel against their rule in the legendary Dragon War, the Dragon War didn't really reach Solstheim, as on Solstheim sometime earlier there had already been a sort of civil war between the local dragon priests, one of whom, Mirak, with the aid of Hermaeus Mora, betrayed the dragons and proclaimed himself ruler of Solstheim together with several other priests. That led to a bit of an alternate history in Solstheim. Now, that whole history is very much something for another time, but what is important to know is that in the end he was overthrown by another dragon priest by the name of Valok, who was aided by the dragon cult. And as such, the dragon cult re-established itself on Solstheim in an apocalyptic battle against Mirak's forces, which was said to be so devastating that Solstheim, which had once been part of the mainland of Tamriel according to Skaal tradition, was sundered away from Tamriel. It's said that the Skaal are the dwindled remnants of these dragon cultists who survived this apocalyptic battle, and who were once far more numerous across the island. But over the millennia, as the dragons disappeared from the world, they evolved their religion to worship the Allmaker, and abandoned the ancient ruins of the dragon cult to live in harmony with nature. And as such, they are said to have evolved themselves into the Skaal that we see today, a friendly and hospitable people who have become fan favorites to many. Now, their culture is quite tribal, with people having defined roles. They are led by a chief and by a shaman in religious matters. And there's a Skaal smith, a first hunter who leads their hunting parties when they go out. They have dedicated farmers and so on. Each has their role in their society and each has their place, and each has knowledge to preserve. The smith preserves ancient smithing techniques and, for example, how to work with Skyrim. The shaman preserves secrets and magic, such as special frost magic only known to the Skaal. The farmer preserves farm techniques, warriors preserve warrior techniques, and so on. In their society, one can prove to have come of age by slaying a creature which defiles the Allmaker's creation. For example, to become a full-fledged member of society when coming of age, one could slay a Draugr, for example, as their undead being is seen as a defilement of the Allmaker's creation, with some of the Skaal, long having forgotten the dragon cult, believing that the Draugr must once have been cannibal men who were punished by the Allmaker for their disruption of the natural order. In fact, it's inevitable to just talk about Skaal culture without continuously mentioning the Allmaker and the oneness and balance of the land, as almost everything in their culture revolves around it. For example, theft is seen as a heinous crime, as someone who steals takes more than they need and thus upsets the balance of the world with their greed, with theft being punishable by death, with criminals being sacrificed to ceremonial wolves who send their spirit back to the Allmaker, or by exile, forcing the criminal to live outside of the harmony and ignoring the exile for the rest of their life, even refusing to listen to them when an exile comes back to the village and tries to warn them of incoming dangers, as we see in the Blood Moon DLC of Morrowind, which is kind of stupid, but the Skaal are very set in their ways. And because of this, many among the Skaal, especially youngsters, find life in their society to be too strict or too boring, because while hunting parties can sometimes be away for weeks, everyone else generally stays inside the village and lives a very static life. As such, we have several examples of young Skaal leaving the village or wanting to leave the village, especially in more modern times, to seek adventure and glory and to escape the strictness of society, with some travelling across Tamriel, returning only at old age to the village or never returning at all. In fact, even Thirsk Mead Hall, which is located somewhere else on Solstheim, was founded by some Skaal who found their original Skaal society to be far too strict. Now, it seems that despite their cultural preservation, the Skaal slowly but surely are changing. While in the past they lived very isolated lives, with them being against the Imperial settling on the island, by the 4th era they have accepted Dunmer and Imperial settlers on the southern coast of the island, and while they keep to themselves, they do interact and trade occasionally. With the Skaal now trading, for example, with settlers for things that they first could not easily obtain themselves, such as metal ores, spices, fine fabrics, and so on. And with trade comes exposure to the rest of the world, and presumably this will in the end lead to more and more young Skaal leaving. As even at the time when we visit them in Skyrim, there's talk of their culture slowly dying out, and not only because of those who leave the village, but also because Solstheim itself, which has always been inhospitable and dangerous to a degree, has become more and more perilous to survive in the 4th era, with much of the fertile lands in the south being rendered barren by the ash of Red Mountain, which is making much of the island's southern part inhospitable for those creatures that the Skaal used to hunt, and makes their traditional crops harder to farm. There are now less plants and animals to depend on, and the Skaal, known for weathering adversity, as such are dangerously close to being extinct within probably a generation or two, according to the Imperial scholar Tharsten, who's visiting them and documenting their culture around the time of Skyrim. Meaning that, if the Elder Scrolls 6.2 has a Solstheim DLC, there may only be ruins where once stood these buildings, which is kinda sad, as I've always really liked the Skaal personally, ever since Morrowind's Blood Moon DLC. But I guess we'll see what happens. And that's basically all I can say about the Skaal, and I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this video and that I managed to teach you something new about the Elder Scrolls lore today. And if you did learn something new, why not give the video a like or one of those hype boost things. Also, for the people that want a link to my merchandise stores in the description, right now we only have the small mini fan pack, of which I put the last bit of stock online, but after the 10-year anniversary of the channel, which is quickly approaching, I expect there to be more, so if you're interested in that kind of thing, go to the link in the description. And now it's time to end the video and thank my top Patreon subscribers: Golblark, Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Volcure of Argonia, RB Dash, Lexicon, Polycom, Sir Otter, Sword of Bushido, Rakai, Spaceman, James Lynch, Baradermas, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to these people and all the others on screen who are my wonderful Patreon subscribers and YouTube members who keep this channel afloat and put me in the position to make these videos in the first place. So, huge thanks to them. And I will see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Hopefully next week. Bye bye.